The Crown and the Cross, the unwritten reign of Queen Christina of Sweden, daughter of the North. The child was not supposed to live. That bitter winter night in December 1626, Stockholm was gripped by an icy silence. Beyond the thick stone walls of the royal castle, Lake Mälaren lay frozen under the pale northern moon, and the winds whispered through the pine trees like a choir of ghosts. Inside the royal chamber, a hush had fallen. Then a sharp cry. A baby had been born. But not just any girl. She was the only surviving child of Gustavus Adolphus, King of Sweden, the Lion of the North, the brilliant Protestant general whose military campaigns would soon shake the foundations of Europe. But the newborn's arrival was marked by confusion and grief. The midwives had first assumed the child was a boy due to the strength of her cry, the size of her limbs, and the way she grasped the air with clenched fists. The nurse had shouted, "A prince," only to be corrected moments later by another. No, a princess. The king, standing near the bed of his exhausted wife, Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg, was silent. And then, to the surprise of many, he smiled. "She shall be raised as a prince," he declared. "She will have no less than a man's education. Sweden will not be ruled by weakness." It was not just pride. It was necessity. Gustavus Adolphus had no male heir, and war, always just beyond the horizon, made the future of Sweden uncertain. From that moment, Christina's path was sealed. She would be more than a royal daughter. She would be Sweden's future, shaped, sharpened, and educated like a warrior philosopher. The shadow of a lion. Her father, Gustavus Adolphus, was no ordinary monarch. He was the living embodiment of Sweden's military ambitions, tall, commanding, and deadly in battle. Under his reign, Sweden had emerged as a major power, claiming lands along the Baltic and asserting Protestant authority in the chaos of the 30 Years' War. He was a battlefield king, the kind who didn't direct armies from palaces but rode among the cavalry, sword in hand, musket fire in his ears. To Christina, who would never truly know him beyond early childhood, he became myth before memory. When she was just 6 years old, he left for Germany to fight in the war that would define the religious and political structure of Europe. She never saw him again. He died a hero's death at the Battle of Lutzen in 1632, his blood soaking the foggy field beside fallen soldiers. His body was returned to Sweden encased in ice, a gesture meant to preserve not only the flesh but the legend. And it was to his daughter, not his son, that the crown passed. The child queen. Christina was crowned Queen of Sweden at the age of 6, though her official reign would begin only after her regency ended. Until then, a council governed in her name, though it was clear to many that this child was no ordinary figurehead. Even at an early age, Christina displayed a precocious brilliance. She read fluently in Latin before most noble boys of her age could write their own names. She absorbed history, philosophy, and theology with an almost alarming intensity. Her tutors often said they were learning more from her questions than they could teach with answers. But alongside this intellectual hunger was a defiant streak. Christina disliked frills and dresses. She walked with hands behind her back like a philosopher deep in thought. She insisted on riding, fencing, and joining military drills. Androgyny was not merely tolerated in her, it was encouraged. "I am not made like other women," she once said. "I was born with a man's soul." The court was divided. Some saw her as a prodigy, a ruler forged in the flames of war and destiny. Others whispered behind silk sleeves that she was unnatural, cursed, dangerous. But none denied her power. She was the girl raised to be a king. A mother's madness. If Christina's childhood was shaped by intellect and politics, it was also haunted by grief. Her mother, Maria Eleonora, never recovered from the death of Gustavus Adolphus. Maria Glaya. She adorned their home with black drapery, refused daylight, and spoke to portraits as if they breathed. She would sleep beside the coffin of her late husband and, at one point, tried to entomb Christina in the same mausoleum. The Regency Council intervened. Christina was removed from her mother's care and placed under the watchful eye of guardians and tutors. From that day on, she built emotional walls as solid as the castle around her. She would love ideas, books, art, but people, she trusted few, needed fewer still. Mind set free. In the quiet of study halls and the echoing marble of royal libraries, Christina found her true calling, knowledge. She was drawn to the classics, especially the lives of Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Emperor Augustus, not for their violence, but for their vision. She saw in them a kind of existential boldness, the courage to shape the world with thought and will alone. And she began to dream, not of wedding balls or noble suitors, but of building a court so radiant with intellect that it would rival Florence in the time of the Medicis, a place where poets, scientists, and philosophers would gather, a kingdom of the mind. The seeds of Christina's later transformation and her eventual rejection of the throne were already taking root. The girl who had once been mistaken for a boy would become a queen who would refuse to be defined by either role. And as the frost of her childhood melted into the fire of early rule, Europe would come to realize Sweden was no longer governed by a warlord. It was now led by a question in human form, a kingdom in fire. The Europe she inherited. In the 1630s, Europe was not a map of nations. It was a battlefield of belief. The 30 Years' War, which had begun in 1618 as a conflict between Protestants and Catholics in the Holy Roman Empire, had sprawled into a monstrous continent-wide struggle for power, territory, and ideological survival. The fighting consumed regions from Bohemia to Bavaria, Alsace to the Netherlands. Cities were burned, armies lived off the land like locusts. Mercenaries switched sides as often as banners changed. And in the north, like a torchbearer in the darkness, stood Sweden. Under Gustavus Adolphus, Sweden had entered the war not only as a Protestant power, but as a rising military machine. His victories in battles such as Breitenfeld, 1631, and Lutzen, 1632, where he died, had proven that the Swedes, long dismissed as northern barbarians, could outmaneuver and outgun even the great imperial armies of Europe. When Christina inherited the crown, Sweden was at its zenith, rich in spoils, feared by enemies and admired by Protestant allies. But behind that glory loomed exhaustion, ruling from the shadows. As Christina grew from precocious girl to thoughtful adolescent, Sweden's Regency Council continued to rule in her name. The country, flush with foreign silver and conquered cities, was admired abroad. But internally, strains were showing. Sweden's economy was stretched thin. Its soldiers, though victorious, were weary. And its people, farmers, fishermen, townsfolk, had grown tired of war taxes, conscriptions, and the endless bleeding of their sons into distant soil. The Regency Council, led by Chancellor Axel Oxenstierna, kept the wheels turning. He was a brilliant administrator, a true architect of the Swedish Empire, and, at least at first, a paternal figure to Christina. But as she aged, it became clear that Christina was not content to be a ceremonial queen. By the time she reached her late teens, she was already attending council meetings, challenging policy decisions, and demanding access to military and diplomatic reports. She listens like a scholar, one foreign envoy reported, and argues like a barrister. Mind on fire. By her 18th birthday, Christina was recognized across Europe not just as a sovereign but as an intellectual prodigy. She corresponded with scholars in France, Germany, Italy, and the Low Countries. She had amassed one of the largest private libraries in Northern Europe, over 6,000 volumes, many smuggled in through Catholic territories, despite Sweden's staunch Lutheran laws. She read Homer, Tacitus, Aristotle, and Montaigne with equal fervor. She memorized entire pages of philosophy and debated them in the palace courtyards. She quizzed ambassadors on ancient history and often corrected them. But her mind did not burn alone. Christina began to reshape the court around her. She invited scientists and mathematicians to lecture at her palace. She hired actors and musicians from Italy and France to introduce new forms of art to the cold north. She broke protocol constantly, refusing to wear a crown, dressing in men's clothes during hunting parties, and once even sneaking into a military council dressed as a soldier. And while the Lutheran clergy began to grow uneasy, foreign courts grew fascinated. A mirror to Europe, Sweden under Christina became a paradox. A Protestant kingdom led by a monarch obsessed with Catholic writers. A battlefield nation governed by a ruler more interested in books than blood. A conservative society watched over by a queen who refused to marry or even behave like a queen at all. Rumors swirled through Europe. She walks like a man. He sleeps only 3 hours a night and reads until dawn. Cheap philosophers in her bedchamber, not suitors. Some said she was mad. Others said she was divine. Christina, for her part, ignored them all. To her, the real madness was the way Europe clung to broken systems, kingdoms obsessed with lineage, armies dying for papal decrees, women locked in silk cages of courtly obedience. She was not there to decorate the throne. She was there to challenge the world that built it. A choice in the shadows. By 1644, Christina was approaching the official age of majority, the time when her regency would end and she would rule Sweden alone. Here, the question hung over Stockholm like storm clouds over the Baltic. Would this strange, brilliant, unpredictable queen fulfill her father's legacy or burn it all down? One night, alone in the tower study of the Tre Kronor castle, she wrote in her journal, "What is rule if not burden? The crown is not golden, it is iron. It weighs the soul." Unbeknownst to her council, to the bishops, to the foreign spies watching from across embassies and chapels, Christina had begun to think of freedom. Not political freedom, personal freedom. Freedom from the throne, from expectations, from marriage, from the religion she had never truly believed in. It would be years before she made her move. But already the flame had been lit, the philosopher queen, the mind of a monarch. By the mid-1640s, Queen Christina had stepped fully into her role as sovereign of Sweden. But unlike many rulers before her, Christina's reign was not defined by conquests or displays of military might. Instead, it was shaped by her insatiable thirst for knowledge, philosophy, and culture. She surrounded herself with the greatest minds of her age. Poets, scientists, artists, and philosophers flocked to her court in Stockholm, eager to be part of an intellectual renaissance in the cold north. Her court became a beacon for scholars across Europe. It was whispered in Parisian salons, Italian academies, and English libraries. The Northern Queen who rules with the mind. The invitation to Descartes. One of the most dramatic moments in Christina's reign came when she invited the great French philosopher René Descartes to Sweden. The two corresponded for months before Descartes accepted the invitation to join her court in 1649. For Christina, Descartes represented the pinnacle of human reason. His method of doubt, his famous dictum, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, resonated deeply with her own quest for truth and understanding. He hoped that under his guidance, Sweden might become a center of philosophical enlightenment, a place where reason would govern society, transcending the chaos of war, religion, and politics. Winter's cold embrace. Descartes arrived in Stockholm during one of the harshest winters on record. The Queen's morning routine included lectures at dawn, an unusual schedule that challenged even the most robust minds. For the philosopher, accustomed to the warmer climes of France, the cold was more than a physical discomfort. The demands placed on him by the Queen's relentless curiosity soon took a toll on his health. Despite this, Descartes engaged fully in the court's intellectual life, discussing metaphysics, ethics, and the nature of the soul with Christina and her closest advisors. Tragedy in philosophy. Tragically, Descartes' time in Sweden was brief. Within months, he succumbed to pneumonia, likely hastened by the brutal cold and exhausting schedule. His death shocked the Queen and left a void in her court. But the seeds he planted did not wither. Christina continued to champion scientific inquiry and philosophical debate, sponsoring scholars and encouraging the establishment of academies. The Queen's vision. Christina's vision for Sweden was radical. She saw a future where rulers were philosophers, wars were fought with ideas instead of swords, and societies were built on knowledge and tolerance. Her patronage extended beyond philosophy to the arts and sciences. She collected paintings, commissioned plays, and funded explorations. Her court rivaled those of Italy and France in cultural sophistication. The conflict of faith. Yet, amid her intellectual pursuits, Christina wrestled with profound spiritual questions. Raised a Lutheran, she felt increasingly estranged from the dogmas of her childhood faith. She questioned the authority of the Church and sought a personal understanding of God and salvation. This internal conflict would soon lead her down a path few monarchs dared to tread. A queen unlike any other, Christina was a ruler ahead of her time. She defied gender norms by dressing in men's clothing and refusing to marry. She rejected the traditional roles expected of queens, and instead crafted a unique identity as a philosopher queen. Her charisma and intellect made her both beloved and feared. And as Europe watched, the Queen prepared for a decision that would shock the world. Faith and doubt. The burden of belief. For Queen Christina, faith was never simple. Raised in the strict Lutheran tradition of Sweden, a nation forged in religious conflict, she was expected to be a paragon of Protestant virtue. But beneath the surface, doubts stirred. Her passion for philosophy and reason clashed with rigid doctrines. She found herself questioning the Church's teachings on salvation, predestination, and the role of grace. A secret yearning. In private, Christina explored Catholicism. She read forbidden texts smuggled into her library. She corresponded with Catholic priests and theologians in Rome and Paris. Her court whispered rumors. The Queen was no longer a true Lutheran. But outwardly, Christina maintained her Protestant facade, aware of the political dangers that conversion could bring. The weight of conscience. The 30 Years' War had left Europe scarred and divided. For Christina, religion was not merely belief, it was power, identity, and politics. A public conversion to Catholicism could alienate her Protestant subjects and invite enemies. Yet her conscience demanded honesty. Secret steps toward Rome. In 1651, Christina secretly applied for permission to convert. The papacy saw an opportunity. Rome began to court the Queen, sending envoys and gifts. The Vatican promised protection and a grand welcome, but also expected political loyalty. Torn between worlds, Christina's internal struggle intensified. She longed for spiritual peace, but feared the cost. Her council advised caution. Her people were suspicious. The Queen's diaries reveal a woman torn between duty and desire, crown and conscience. At the Stagel decision. In 1654, Christina made a stunning announcement. She would abdicate the Swedish throne. Her decision shocked Europe. She renounced her crown, converted openly to Catholicism, and left Sweden for Rome. A new chapter begins. Christina's abdication was more than a political act. It was a declaration of personal freedom. She chose her beliefs over her birthright, her conscience over her crown. Her journey from Protestant queen to Catholic convert would shape her legacy as a rebel, thinker, and symbol of courage. The Great Abdication. The shocking announcement. In June 1654, the European courts were stunned. Queen Christina of Sweden, the learned and enigmatic monarch who had ruled since childhood, announced her intention to abdicate the throne. It was unprecedented, a reigning queen voluntarily relinquishing power in an age when monarchies were synonymous with absolute rule. Her reasons were as complex as her character: a yearning for religious freedom, a rejection of courtly expectations, and a desire to live on her own terms. Farewell to Stockholm. Christina's departure was bittersweet. The people she had ruled since childhood watched as their queen prepared to leave, her figure wrapped in robes that seemed to symbolize the weight she bore. In her farewell speech, she expressed no regret but a solemn resolve. I leave the crown behind, but not my love for Sweden. May this land flourish beyond the bounds of my reign. Her cousin and heir, Charles X. Gustav, was ready to ascend, but the nation braced for change. The journey south. Leaving behind the cold, war-torn north, Christina began her journey to Rome, the city that symbolized her spiritual aspirations. She traveled with a retinue of loyal servants, artists, and advisors, many of whom shared her intellectual and cultural passions. Her route took her through Germany, France, and Italy, places where she was both a curiosity and a celebrity. Life after power. In Rome, Christina embraced a new life. She was welcomed by the papacy with grand ceremonies. The city's elite were fascinated by this queen who had traded a crown for a cross. She built a magnificent palace, hosted lavish salons, and surrounded herself with artists, composers, and philosophers. Her court was unlike any other, a blend of royalty, scholarship, and eccentricity, challenges and controversies. But Christina's new life was not without struggles. Her conversion alienated many former allies. She faced criticism for her unconventional behavior, dressing in men's clothing, avoiding marriage, and maintaining close friendships with both men and women. Political intrigues followed her even in exile. Spain, France, and the Papal States all courted her influence. Legacy in the making. Christina's abdication and subsequent life challenged the traditional roles assigned to women and monarchs. She redefined what it meant to be a ruler, not only in politics but in intellect and identity. Her story would inspire debates on gender, faith, and freedom for centuries. Christina in Rome. A royal arrival. When Queen Christina arrived in Rome in December 1655, the Eternal City erupted in celebration. Crowds gathered to witness the unconventional monarch who had given up an empire for a new faith. The Vatican prepared an elaborate welcome, processions, banquets, and blessings. To honor the convert they saw as a triumph of Catholic diplomacy. For Rome, Christina was not just a royal curiosity. She was a powerful symbol. A Protestant queen who had chosen the Catholic Church over her own throne. The baptism of a queen. Although Christina had converted privately years earlier, she underwent a formal baptism in the Catholic faith shortly after her arrival in Rome. In the Church of Santa Maria in Vallicella, under the golden glow of Baroque altars and the gaze of cardinals and princes, she was baptized in front of all of Christendom. She took the name Maria Alexandra, a blend of sacred devotion and classical admiration, but she never stopped being Christina to the world. A palace of her own. With papal support and personal wealth, Christina purchased the Palazzo Riario on the Janiculum Hill, a grand Renaissance building overlooking the Tiber. There she established a court unlike any other in Rome. Musicians performed works by Corelli and Scarlatti. Philosophers debated Cartesian logic and Neoplatonism in her salons. Sculptors, poets, astronomers, and even magicians found patronage under her roof. Her palace became a meeting ground for Europe's displaced geniuses and a hotbed of new ideas. Gender, power, and persona. Christina shocked Roman society with her behavior. She wore men's clothing in public, rode horses through the streets, and dismissed the idea of marriage as a shackle to the mind. She once said, "I was born free. Why should I be bound by the same chains I cast off in Sweden?" Her masculinity was not merely symbolic, it was a challenge to societal expectations, especially in the rigidly defined gender roles of 17th century Europe. While some admired her independence, others viewed her as erratic, even dangerous. She didn't care. She had shed one identity, now she was building another. A palace without a throne. Though she had left Sweden behind, Christina never abandoned politics. In Rome she became an unofficial diplomat, navigating alliances, influencing papal elections, and advising European ambassadors. Her political mind was as sharp as ever, and the papacy often consulted her on affairs of state. She played kings against cardinals, befriended Spanish royals, and intrigued with French emissaries, all while maintaining her image as a learned eccentric. As Christina legend grows, stories about Christina spread across Europe, that she carried a sword beneath her cloak, that she kept her own military guard within her palace, that she was secretly writing a philosophical treatise on monarchy and sin. Some of it was myth, some of it was carefully cultivated mystique. But one thing was clear, Christina was no ordinary exile. She was a queen without borders. A letter from Sweden. Years later, Christina received word from Stockholm. Her successor, Charles the X, had died suddenly. A brief power vacuum followed. There were whispers, could Christina return? But she refused. "I have no more desire to rule a kingdom," she wrote. "My crown is the freedom I purchased with renunciation. Eternal, unyielding." By the 1660s, Christina had become one of Rome's most enigmatic and influential figures. She was no longer the Queen of Sweden. She was something older, wilder, freer, a modern Medici, a sovereign of spirit, a paradox wrapped in velvet and steel. Power without a throne, a queen in the shadows. Though Queen Christina no longer ruled a kingdom, her presence in Rome rippled through Europe like a stone tossed into a calm lake. She had no armies, no state treasury, and no official government. Yet diplomats, nobles, cardinals, and even monarchs sought her favor, advice, or, at the very least, her attention. From behind the high walls of her Palazzo Riario, Christina wove threads of influence across papal courts, royal dynasties, and intellectual circles. The art of influence. Christina excelled in the forgotten art of subtle power. She wrote letters that were both personal and politically loaded. She gave gifts with hidden meaning. She hosted dinners where alliances were quietly born over wine and Aristotle. She supported the Jesuits in theological debates, but also befriended skeptics and heretics. She lobbied for certain cardinals to be elected pope, sometimes successfully, sometimes disastrously. She advised kings, not officially but through whispered channels. One French ambassador remarked, "She plays the courts like a harpsichord, every string pulled with precision and feeling." The papal conclaves. Christina played a visible role during several papal elections, especially the conclave of 1667. She strongly supported Giulio Rospigliosi, who became Pope Clement IX. Her support had been vocal, persuasive, and timely, a rare feat for a woman in the politics of the Catholic Church. In return, Clement IX favored her with land, prestige, and an increase in pension. It was clear to many that the Queen of Sweden had become a queen of influence in Rome. But not all popes were fond of her. In 1676, Pope Innocent XI was elected a deeply moralistic and austere man. He found Christina's lavish lifestyle, theatrical pursuits, and independence troubling. He understood that in the past, Christina, and the man whose fate now outlined her reality, had felt the same distress. Their relationship cooled, but Christina, ever diplomatic, adapted her approach. She knew when to push and when to retreat behind her velvet curtain of mystery. Being patron of arts and minds, Christina's court remained one of the most dazzling intellectual salons in Europe. She sponsored dramatists, painters, and composers. She was especially fond of opera and funded several public performances, a radical gesture in a city where women's voices were often silenced on stage. She supported women writers and thinkers, offering them not only a space at her table, but an equal voice in discussions once reserved for men. She even envisioned a utopian academy, a gathering of brilliant minds from all nations and creeds where free thought could flourish without fear. Though it never fully materialized, the dream reflected her deepest values. Her own philosophy of monarchy. In the quiet hours of night, Christina continued to write. Though many of her manuscripts were destroyed or lost, fragments remain, especially her political treatises. She described monarchy not as divine right, but as an art of burden and self-denial. She claimed true sovereignty was not control over people, but over oneself, a shocking idea in an era of absolute kings. The wisest ruler, she wrote, is the one who sees the crown as a cage and walks away with head unbowed. A dangerous woman. Not everyone admired her. Some saw her as a threat, a woman who blurred lines between gender, religion, and power. Conservative voices in the Vatican accused her of arrogance, vanity, even sorcery. She was rumored to host secret philosophical rituals by candlelight, to read forbidden books, to consort with excommunicated thinkers. But even those who feared her could not look away. She had become myth in her own time, not by ruling a nation, but by mastering the game of influence. A sovereign of another kind. By the early 1680s, Christina was aging but undiminished in wit. Rome had changed. The fires of the Counter-Reformation had cooled. A new generation of leaders looked to her not with suspicion, but curiosity. She had outlasted enemies. She had inspired allies. And though she held no throne, no army, no heir, her legacy was growing. She was at last the sovereign of her own soul, a woman outside time, neither king nor queen. In an age obsessed with roles and categories, Queen Christina of Sweden was something Europe had no name for. She was born a princess, reared as a prince, ruled as a queen, and then walked away from it all. Her life defied classification. She was neither conventionally feminine nor wholly masculine. She was not just Catholic or Protestant, ruler or exile, saint or heretic. She was simply Christina. The question of gender. Christina's gender expression challenged every norm of the 17th century. From a young age, she rejected the tight confines of femininity. She dressed in breeches and tunics, hunted, fenced, and rode on horseback like a nobleman. At court, she debated men as equals, often more than equals, and refused to marry, despite intense pressure. The marriage question haunted her reign. Foreign princes were paraded before her. Alliances were drawn up. Even Pope Alexander VII later asked why she had never married. Her answer? I was not made to be a wife. She called marriage a comedy of submission and motherhood a sacrifice of the mind. In her writings, she described herself as possessing the spirit of Caesar in the body of Sappho. Rumors and relationships. Christina's personal life has fascinated and frustrated historians for centuries. Her closest companions were often women. Ebba Spar, a Swedish noblewoman and court favorite, was among the most notable. Christina referred to her as Belle and sent her letters filled with longing and affection. Many have speculated on the romantic nature of these relationships. Christina never publicly acknowledged any romantic partner, male or female, but her behavior suggested deep, intimate attachments that went beyond courtly friendship. To her critics, these relationships were scandalous. To her admirers, they were revolutionary. Modern scholars view Christina as a possible early figure in queer history, someone who lived openly outside the gender and sexual norms of her time. Power in solitude. Though she was constantly surrounded by people, artists, priests, philosophers, spies, Christina often lived in deliberate solitude. She wrote long, introspective letters about loneliness, divine purpose, and the weight of consciousness. She rejected the life of a wife and mother, but not out of coldness. Rather, because her passions were too vast for any single bond. She was in love with ideas, with beauty, with power, and freedom. The role she invented. What Christina created for herself was something rare, a new role in a rigid world. She was an intellectual sovereign without land, a cultural patron without dynasty, a woman who commanded influence without marriage or heirs. She turned her palace in Rome into a theater of self-invention, a space where the old labels of gender, religion, and class broke down, and new forms of identity emerged. Portraits and perceptions. Contemporary portraits of Christina are revealing. She is rarely painted in the feminine finery of European queens. Instead, she is shown in scholars' robes, military capes, or plain black clothing. Her expression is often unreadable, half defiant, half removed. Writers described her as majestic and severe, too clever for her own time, and a mind unchained by the flesh. To some, she was a wholly eccentric. To others, a cautionary tale. But to many, especially in later generations, she became a symbol of authenticity, of living one's truth, regardless of judgment. Legacy in the mirror. Centuries before feminism had a name, before gender theory was taught in universities, before non-binary was a concept, Christina had lived those truths. She never claimed to be anything but herself. In doing so, she challenged the structures that sought to define her. She asked questions no one was prepared to answer, not in her century, and perhaps not even in ours. "I was born free," she once said, "and I have lived so." Intrigue, spies, and sovereignty. The chessboard of Europe. Though she no longer wore a crown, Queen Christina of Sweden never stepped away from power. She simply changed the board. In the decades after her abdication, Christina operated as an independent political agent, untethered to any single nation, faith, or party. She moved through Rome, Paris, Naples, and Madrid with an ease no other royal could replicate. She had no official title, no courtly obligations, and yet kings sought her counsel, popes measured her moods, ambassadors trailed her every movement. To many, she was unpredictable. To the wise, she was indispensable. A private intelligence network. Christina quietly built something few queens ever possessed, a personal network of spies and informants. Former diplomats, disgraced nobles, multilingual nuns, traveling merchants, even theater performers. They whispered into her ears the secrets of kingdoms. She had agents in Vienna reporting on Habsburg intentions. She received letters from Paris detailing Louis XIV's shifting alliances. Even in Stockholm, her old homeland, sympathizers sent her news of succession crises and political shifts. She knew how to reward loyalty and punish betrayal. Her letters, many written in cipher, show a mind deeply engaged in espionage and geopolitical strategy. "A queen who abdicates," she once wrote, "loses her throne, not her eyes." The Naples Affair. One of the most dramatic episodes of Christina's political life took place in the 1660s in the Kingdom of Naples. At the time, Naples was under Spanish control and beset with internal unrest. Secret societies, noble conspiracies, and populist uprisings simmered beneath the surface. Christina saw an opportunity. She traveled south under the pretext of pilgrimage, but quickly became entangled in local plots. Some sources claim she supported a Republican movement to break Spanish dominance. Others believe she was sent as a secret envoy by the French to destabilize Spain's holdings. Regardless, her involvement triggered alarm bells in Madrid and the Vatican. She was placed under surveillance. Some even proposed arresting her. But she slipped through their fingers, returning to Rome with grace, her position intact, her knowledge expanded. Rome, the new throne. By the 1670s, Christina had effectively turned Rome into her capital. Popes came and went, but her influence endured. She advised on diplomatic marriages, papal legacies, and war plans. She was the only woman permitted to attend certain high-level political discussions, not because of her rank, but because of her mind. She also mediated between Catholic and Protestant courts, acting as a rare bridge between divided faiths. To Spain, she was a valuable ally. To France, an unpredictable asset. To the Vatican, a constant mystery. She played them all like pieces on a board, but not for conquest. For balance, for influence, for the thrill of knowing that, even crownless, she remained powerful. A warning from the papacy. Not everyone approved of Christina's maneuvering. In 1676, Pope Innocent XI, a man of strict morals and conservative politics, expressed open disapproval of her salons, her theatrical patronage, and her rumored intrigues. A cardinal once warned her directly, "You are not a sovereign here, you are a guest." Her response, "Then perhaps Rome should remember how gracious a guest I have been." She scaled back her public diplomacy, but never surrendered it. Instead, she shifted to quieter methods, private audiences, coded letters, third-party emissaries. The Queen had learned that true power did not require titles. Friends in high and low places. Christina's circle defied social boundaries. She drank wine with poets, debated science with monks, and consulted with alchemists, generals, and mystics. Some nights she dined with cardinals. Other nights she conversed with beggars. She believed knowledge had no rank. Her palace became a neutral zone, a space where ideas, not bloodlines, decided one's worth. And through that she influenced more than courts. She influenced culture itself. The puppet and the player. Some critics accused Christina of being a pawn of larger empires, of Spain, of France, of the Jesuits. But history tells another story. Christina was not a pawn. She was the player moving the pieces. With every rumor she started, every alliance she disrupted, every secret she uncovered, she carved a legacy that no map could contain. She was not building an empire of land. She was building an empire of mind. The final years. The Queen grows quiet. By the late 1680s, the once vibrant figure who had stormed Rome with wit, vision, and defiance began to slow. Age did not dim Christina's mind, but her body grew weary. She suffered from recurring fevers, joint pain, and what some physicians of the time called melancholia, a deep introspective sadness that today we might understand as depression. Still, her salon remained open, her letters traveled far, and her words, when spoken, were still treated as prophecy. But she had begun preparing for something different. Not an abdication, not exile, but a departure no one escapes. The polis as a monastery. In her final years, Christina transformed parts of Palazzo Riario into a place of retreat. Gone were the grand banquets and theatrical spectacles. In their place, quiet evenings with philosophers, candlelit readings of Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, and long walks in the garden under the Roman moon. She had not become devout in the traditional sense. The rituals of Catholicism still bored her. But she had turned inward, reflecting deeply on mortality and meaning. She wrote, "I have tasted the blood of empires and the dust of eternity. Let now the silence teach me what noise never could." Reflections in the margins. She spent hours rereading her own notes, memoirs, and treatises, many of which she began to revise, annotate, or burn. Some nights she dictated philosophical reflections to her secretary, thoughts on leadership, freedom, gender, and faith. Among the fragments historians recovered, to rule others is a feat, to master the self a miracle. A woman is no more bound by her sex than a flame is by its wick. I have seen popes kneel before symbols, I have knelt before none. These musings were not bitterness. They were liberation. She no longer needed to be understood, only remembered as she truly was. Farewell to the world. In April of 1689, Christina's health took a sharp turn. Doctors were summoned, prayers were said, diplomats arrived quietly, unsure whether to mourn or pay tribute. On April 19th, in the palace she had made her sanctuary, Christina passed away at the age of 62. Her last words, whispered to her confessor, were never recorded with certainty, but one servant claimed she said, "I die a queen as I lived, without subjects, without fear." The Vatican's decision. The Catholic Church faced a rare dilemma: how to bury a woman who was never quite theirs. She had defied their rules, scandalized their nobles, and questioned their faith. Yet she had also championed their cause, converted sincerely, and lived among them with grace and grandeur. Pope Alexander VIII made the final call. Christina would be buried in the grotto of St. Peter's Basilica, a place reserved for saints, popes, and emperors. She became one of only a handful of women interred in the sacred crypt, and the only queen of Sweden to rest beneath Rome. Legacy beyond marble. After her death, her possessions were scattered. Some were stolen, others auctioned. A few treasured manuscripts vanished forever. But her legacy could not be erased. She had changed how a monarch could live, and how a woman could rule, how a soul could seek. Historians called her eccentric, brilliant, dangerous, enlightened. Writers imagined her in fiction, painting her as everything from a tragic heroine to a revolutionary visionary. Artists and feminists of later centuries would find in her story the fire of possibility, that one could be royal without ruling, wise without permission, powerful without permission, and remembered without apology. A life in defiance of time. Christina remains to this day one of the most enigmatic figures of early modern Europe. Not because she wore a crown, but because she took it off. Epilogue, the echo of a name, the afterlife of a legacy. Queen Christina died without children, without a dynasty, and without a crown, yet her name echoed louder with each passing century. In her lifetime she had defied nearly every boundary imposed upon her. Religion, gender, monarchy, tradition. And in doing so she became something rare, not a symbol of her age, but a challenge to it. Puzzle to historians. For generations, scholars struggled with Christina. Some called her mad, others hailed her as a genius. She was portrayed in operas, novels, paintings, and academic debates, always enigmatic, always hard to define. Was she a failed monarch or a visionary leader? a gender rebel or a confused soul, a saint of freedom or an exile of her own making. The truth, perhaps, is all of these at once, and none fully. That is her magic. The first modern woman. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Christina was rediscovered by new voices. Feminists embraced her refusal to conform. Queer historians saw in her relationships and identity a courageous early echo of their own struggles. Secular philosophers admired her disdain for orthodoxy, an embrace of intellectual freedom. Simone de Beauvoir mentioned her, Susan Sontag wrote about her, filmmakers like Greta Garbo brought her to the screen. Suddenly, Christina was not just a queen, she was a symbol. Statues and silence. There are statues of Christina in Sweden. Streets bear her name, museums display her letters and her sword. But in many places, she remains a whisper, too complicated for textbooks, too strange for simple celebration. And yet, wherever someone refuses to be boxed in by identity, wherever someone speaks truth to power with wit and fire, wherever someone renounces safety for the sake of self, Christina lives on, the flame that chose itself. If Christina's life teaches anything, it is this: power means nothing if you do not own yourself. Courage is not always conquest. Sometimes it is refusal. An identity, when chosen freely, can be more lasting than any throne. "I am the sovereign of my soul," she once wrote. "Let kings rule their people. I will rule myself." The queen who never left. In the echoing crypt beneath St. Peter's Basilica, where popes sleep in marble silence, one name stands apart. Not a pope, not a man, not a saint, but a queen who reigned not over a nation but over an idea. That to live fully one must sometimes walk away from everything, even a crown. Her name? Christina. And in the stillness of history, she still speaks.